it. A video released. British aid worker David Haines being beheaded by an ISIS terrorist. And he's in the video, he's blaming David Cameron and Tony Blair for his execution. So are ISIS terrorists right to blame British foreign policy for their actions in Iraq? Give me a call, 0345 6060 973, or text 84850 and join the conversation with me, Larry Lamb, on LBC. I was really taken by a suggestion made by a caller to Ken and Dave's LBC show yesterday morning. The man said the British government should put their hands up and admit that invading Iraq was a big mistake, that we should accept an element of responsibility for what is unravelling in the region right now. I think myself, most people would recognise that unseating Saddam Hussein, now we know just exactly what he was keeping under control by means every bit as brutal as those used by the terrorists, was perhaps not the wisest of policies to have pursued. A really lethal hornet's nest that we are all now threatened by. But making such an admission presumably would be a precursor to negotiations. But ISIS is it no way appears to be presenting itself as a body to be negotiated with. Their aim is to establish a so-called caliphate, run according to their interpretation of the Quran. They seem bound on a course of punishing anyone who doesn't buy their doctrine. So presumably establishing their caliphate will be the first step in converting, if necessary, by force, the rest of the world. So where's the rest of the world now? Don't they all see the threat? In the video they released, the victims heard saying, "I hold you, David Cameron, entirely responsible for my execution," and then goes on to include Tony Blair. Are ISIS terrorists right to blame British foreign policy for their actions? And if so, what do we do next? Give me a call on 0345 6060 973. Or you can text 84850. You can email larry@lbc.co.uk, or you can tweet at LBC and join the conversation. On the line now is my guest, Nabila Ramdani, Middle East commentator and journalist. And good morning to you, Nabila.
Good morning, Larry.
Here we go again. Can you tell me what your reaction is to the news this morning, Nabila?
Well, yes, indeed. I mean, it's, the first thing to say is that it's very easy to talk about international terrorism and the threat it poses to the world in abstract terms, but it has to be said that the case of David Haines really does bring the whole thing very close to home. And, as to your question, the main question in your program, are ISIS terrorists right to blame British foreign policy for their action? Well, I think there's absolutely no justification whatsoever for ISIS's barbaric crimes.
No.
Murdering David Haines, an aid worker with an unblemished record for international service, somebody who served in the Balkans, in the Middle East, in North Africa, in Africa, a man who only wanted to do good in the world, is a crime against humanity, and it was committed by sadistic cowards. And these sadistic cowards will come up with all kinds of convoluted reasons for their butchery. But to link it to British foreign policy is absolutely pitiful. In short, if you disagree with something politically, you do not kidnap somebody who has absolutely nothing to do with that policy and then cut his head off, in very simple terms. Sadly, however, IS will manipulate this crime into a protest against British foreign policy. And the stated aim is to deter Britain and indeed their allies, including America and the West in general, from interfering into their own evil affairs. But clearly murdering a British citizen is likely to achieve the exact opposite and draw Britain further into the war against terrorism. And this is also because it is, of course, clear that some of the IS terrorists are, in fact, British. For example, it is believed that the execution of the American journalist James Foley is believed to be the same who beheaded David Haines. And this gruesome figure, who the media has nicknamed Jihadi John, is clearly someone trying to bait the British government and indeed the British people. Technically, IS wants to deter the West from interfering, but don't forget that a lot of these men are not rational. And my own feeling is that many of them have a very nihilistic approach to policy, and that a nihilistic war is something that they're quite happy with. They don't just want to live quietly in their own caliphate. They want to expand it around the world and destroy all of their perceived enemies.
So, I mean, to me, as I say, I mean, this seems like the stepping stone. This is where it's the keystone to the establishment of their caliphate, and then with the idea that they will expand it. So, like, where is the UN in all of this, Nabila?
Well, there has been efforts recently to try to set up a coalition of the willing, if you like, to fight IS, the Islamic State, and that would encapsulate, involve countries like Saudi Arabia, Gulf countries in general, Jordan, and also Egypt, and that's why John Kerry, the U.S. Secretary of State, is touring the Middle East at the moment. And the idea is that Muslim countries are appalled by the crimes committed by IS, and they try to work out an effective way of indeed getting rid of IS altogether. But of course, crimes committed against somebody like David Haines or indeed other journalists, Sutcliffe or indeed Foley, bring that problem even more to the fore. And we are seeing how different governments deal differently with that kind of problems. And hostages are, of course, a hugely divisive issue between Western powers. And on the one hand, we have France, which clearly pays ransoms to free its hostages. And on the other hand, we have countries like the UK and the US, which do not. And
but one gets the feeling, I certainly get the feeling that they wouldn't have negotiated money with them anyway. That what they want to do is make this point.
I mean, often, well, it's very clear that IS wants to make an evil point, generally speaking. But, there are there is information about France, which paying ransoms. There are communication lines between IS and Western governments, including France, which, France has a very muddled, secretive approach to hostages, and it was well illustrated by accusations that France routinely pays millions of dollars for the release of hostages. 4 French journalists were freed in April after being kidnapped by IS in Syria, shortly before 2 fellow prisoners from America were beheaded. And President Hollande in France insisted that France doesn't pay ransoms, but a well-sourced report in the German magazine Focus suggests that a deal with IS in fact included some $18 million being placed in their coffers through international companies and shady middlemen, including Turkish secret agents. And this is despite the fact that one of the main reasons that the deeply sinister IS has grown into such a barbarically formidable fighting unit is because of the millions paid to it in ransoms fees.
I mean, in general, what's the reaction to what's going on in the Middle East? Is there any coming together? Is there any, or is it all staying in sort of in the area of, well, let somebody else deal with this? Is there any consensus?
I think that absolutely there's increasingly a consensus that IS is not only a threat to Western governments through the execution and the beheading of Westerners, but a threat to the region primarily and to Muslims, in the first instance. Let's not forget that IS is, first and foremost killing Muslims on the ground, and also indeed a threat to the world, and that is precisely why there's a will amongst Muslim countries in the Arab world to deal with that formidable enemy who has immense fighting capabilities on the battlefield. It is a very strong group.
Yeah.
It moves fast, and it has it leaves all kinds of bombs behind it, for example. It has a lot of military brains, for example. It's not just a wild group driven by, an evil ideology. It seems to have the know-how as to how to deal with very sophisticated weapons, including American weapons, and it seems to be getting advice from former top Iraqi officers. So it's a formidable enemy, and that's precisely why the West is taking it extremely seriously, and it seeks to find an effective solution to put an end to their evil deeds as soon as possible. And for the British government and David Cameron, who's convened an emergency Cobra meeting this morning, having a British citizen executed at the hands of IS and having another British citizen who is being threatened to be beheaded as well, it's the ultimate nightmare. And a knee-jerk reaction would play right into the hand of IS fighters.
Yeah.
So he has to be very careful about what the next step will be and what kind of further assistance the UK will provide, either boots on the ground or any form of other assistance. And also, it's an important aspect of it as well, the criminal procedure of the man who appears to be British and who's carrying out those beheadings.
Yeah. Thank you, Nabila. As ever, right on the button there. Thank you so much for joining us and kicking this discussion off. Nabila Ramdani, Middle East commentator and journalist, joining us there.